Am I wrong for tipping our waitress $20 despite her poor service because my date was playing a game with her tips? I met a guy on a dating app. We hit it off and we arranged for our first date. Things were going well and we sat down and had started some small chit chat. Our waitress comes over asking us what we would like to order. I say what I want and gesture to him so he can order. He orders and then pulls what I think is about $15 on the table. This is your tip. Every time you mess up, I take some away. Oh my god. Oh my god. This is so fucking embarrassed. Cringe. The waitress looked nervous immediately. I'm sitting there a bit shocked, but mostly embarrassed because I wasn't expecting this. She must have been new as well because she did spill some drinks on our table that night, gave us the wrong food, and overall just seemed lost. He took away $13. I asked him why he thought doing tips this way was a good idea. He said it was the best way to ensure good service. When I disagreed, he said, "Can't always be nice to these people. It's not a respectable job." I decided then that I wanted nothing to do with him and called the waitress over to get the bill. I slapped a $20 bill in her hand and got up to pay for my own meal. Later that night, he demanded to know why I had given her the tip despite her poor service, and I told him it's because he decided to treat her livelihood like it was a game. He said because of me, she'll never improve her service and that I'm just a people pleaser. I blocked him, but I've wondered ever since if that was really the right thing to do. So, am I the asshole? Oh my god, who the fuck does this dude think he is for him to think he needs to improve this waitress's service? Are you her dad? Are you her boss? Like, calm down. Like, men feel like they need to run the fucking world sometimes.
Story time about how my boss confessed to me that he likes me and now he's pressuring me to go out with him. Disclaimers in my story time. Send me on Instagram. I've been working at my job for 6 months now. Ever since I started, my boss has been very, very nice to me. If he gets himself coffee, he usually brings me one, and he always offers to buy me my lunch. Of course, I usually say no because I always bring my lunch with me. And also, I just think it's weird that he's always offering. Several times I caught him staring at me, and he would offer to do random things, like walk me to my car. In other words, he was showing a lot of interest. At first, I just wanted to believe that he was just a really nice guy, but I noticed that he wasn't that way with anyone else except for me. So anytime that he would offer to do something for me, or if he would bring me coffee, I made sure to say thank you and seem grateful. I told my boyfriend about my boss, and my boyfriend was convinced that my boss liked me. He told me I shouldn't be as nice as I was, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful or rude. A few weeks ago, we had an office party. Of course, my boyfriend came along with me and everything was fine. Everyone brought their husbands and wives, including my boss. By the way, his wife is super beautiful and really nice. She even had the party catered by one of the best restaurants in town. As my boyfriend and I were heading home, he turns to me and tells me, "Your boss definitely likes you." I asked him why he thought that, and he said that my boss couldn't stop staring at me the whole night. That's when my boyfriend insisted that I should just quit. We got into a huge argument that night. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boss confessed to me that he likes me and now he's pressuring me to date him. Part 2. My boyfriend told me that my boss had been staring at me the whole night. Then he started insisting that I should just quit my job. We basically fought the entire night. I told him I would never quit my job and that my boss was harmless. But it turns out that my boyfriend was right. When I went back to work, my boss started asking me a lot of questions about my boyfriend. He asked me how long we'd been together, if the relationship was serious, if we lived together. He tried to make it seem casual. On the 5th question, I asked my boss if he was okay. And he laughs and says, "I just want to make sure you got a good guy with you." But he sounded so jealous instead. A few days later, I caught my boss staring at me again. And this time I got really annoyed. I stared back at him and waved. That's when he waved back and smiled at me. At the end of the day, he offered to walk me to my car. And I said yes. As we were walking to my car, he starts telling me that he thought I looked really pretty at the party. And that he wanted to confess that he couldn't stop staring at me all night. That's when I turned to him and I said, "Yeah, my boyfriend noticed." He responds, "Well, your boyfriend's very lucky to be with you." And that I was clearly asking for attention with the dress that I wore. By the way, my dress was a long sleeve turtleneck that went below my knees. That's when he says there's nothing wrong with a little flirtation. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my boss confessed to me that he likes me and now he's pressuring me into dating him. After he told me that there was nothing wrong with us flirting, I told him it was totally inappropriate and that I didn't feel comfortable with that. He then laughed and said, "You'll loosen up eventually." I went home and I told my boyfriend everything. My boyfriend went berserk. He started insisting that I quit again. I told him I could handle the situation, that my boss was not going to do anything to me. He then got so mad that he actually left to his parents' house. He told me he would come back to live with me after I quit. But here's the thing, if the tables were turned, I would never ask my boyfriend to quit his job because his boss was flirting with him. I love my job and I don't think it's fair that I have to quit because my boss is flirting with me. Instead, I decided that I would go back to work and simply ignore my boss. But this actually had the opposite effect. My boss started coming on to me even stronger. He came up to me while I was having lunch and asked me if I was ignoring him. I was honest and said yes, a little. That's when he told me that we should talk after work. He walked me to my car and on the way, he told me that he likes me and that he's liked me since the day I started working there. He even said that it's pretty much the only reason why I got the job. But then of course he complimented me on all my work. As he was saying all of this, I just stayed quiet. I really didn't know how to respond. That's when my boss tells me that we should go on a date and that we could have a fruitful relationship. I love my job so much, I'm actually considering saying yes to at least one date. My boyfriend is still not talking to me, by the way. Now my boss even sends me text messages telling me how good I look in the office. And no, I can't report him to anybody. And I don't want to jeopardize my job. Last week, my boss even gave me a raise. And to be honest, I'm really happy about it. My dream is to buy myself a house. But at what cost? Should I say yes to just one date? Or should I say no and suffer the consequences? Or should I quit? But that's not fair either. What do you guys think I should do?
Story time about how I saw my boyfriend propose to another girl in front of me. So a little background information. At the time, my boyfriend and I had been together for around 4 years. We had 2 kids together, and our relationship was pretty rocky. Within the first year of us dating, he would cheat on me all the time, and both times that I was pregnant, he would cheat on me also. Now, after I popped out the second kid, our relationship was going pretty well. And if you're wondering why I didn't leave him when he was cheating on me all the time, well, it was mainly because I grew up in a broken home. And remembering how hard it was on me whenever my parents broke up, I didn't want that for them. Well, over the past few months, my boyfriend had been traveling all over the country with his dad, going to meetings and stuff because he was getting ready to take over half the company. Well, fast forward, it's a Thursday, and my boyfriend has a meeting with some associates who flew in from out of state. And later that night, we were supposed to get on a flight with our friends to go to the Bahamas. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend literally proposed to another girl right in front of me. So like I said, my boyfriend had a meeting with some associates who flew in from out of town. And that night we were supposed to be on a plane to the Bahamas with our friends. So while he was getting ready for this meeting, I went and I dropped the kids off early, and he went to this meeting, and I drove our luggage over to our friend's house because they were just going to drive us to the airport. So my girlfriend and I are super pumped to go on this trip. So we decided to start drinking early, and we went somewhere to get drinks. She suggests this high-end place because the guy at the bar has a crush on her and always gives her free drinks. So we're sitting there having a really good time drinking at the bar. So while we're sitting there, we hear a bunch of clapping and cheering coming from outside. So us being drunk and nosy, we go out there to see what's going on. And what are the chances I walk out there and my boyfriend is down on one knee in front of another girl? And I'm not very confrontational whenever I drink, so I told my best friend to just take me back to her house. When we got back, it was around 6 p.m. And my boyfriend tells me that he's just going to meet us at the airport like for part 3. Part 3 about how my boyfriend proposed to another girl right in front of me. I know this is late, but better late than never. So like I said, we left, I went back to her house, and my boyfriend has the audacity to text me, I'll just meet you guys at the airport. So my best friend's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go beat him up? Of course I said no, so I told her and her boyfriend to just go to the airport while I figured out what I was going to do, and to not say a word. Which was hard for my best friend because she was confrontational as fuck. So I texted my boyfriend saying that I was sick and I just wasn't going to go to the Bahamas with them, when in reality I was packing up our whole house, leaving him with only his clothes and his shoes. So I put all the stuff in storage and I just decided to move back to my mom's house. And yes, this was in a span of a few days. So the whole time that he was gone, I was acting like everything was okay. On the last day of the trip, I sent him a text saying that I knew about everything. And I said I never wanted to hear from him again and I never wanted him to see the kids again. And he took that quite literally. I never got a text back. Well, 4 months after all this happened, I soon find out that he got a new house in North Carolina with his new wife and they have a daughter on the way.
Am I the asshole for marrying my sister's baby daddy? I, 36-year-old female, and my sister, 29 female, got pregnant when she was 18 years old. I'm infertile and knew I couldn't have kids, so when my sister said she was giving her baby up for adoption, I decided to be her mom. My sister went no contact 5 months after giving birth. For a bit of background, my sister got pregnant by a one-night stand and she apparently didn't remember or know the father at the time of birth, but when my daughter V was born, a man T, 35, messaged me on social media claiming to be the father of my child. My sister had run into him at a club and drunkenly confessed to the pregnancy. We met up, he bonded with his daughter, and well, that man is now my husband of 7 years. Coming back to my sister, she called me yesterday. Although I was surprised at her call, I picked up. We made some small talk and then she said she had just gotten married a year back and both of them wanted children but couldn't because her husband was infertile but really wanted kids. I asked her if she wanted to adopt and she said no, she just wanted her baby back. I was speechless for a few moments before replying that if she wants to meet my child as an aunt, she is welcome to, and we can both sit V down and explain the reason for her absence, but she can't just ask me to give up my child. My sister said she'll sue me as she is the birth mother. I told her she was out of her mind, and then I told her how I married the baby daddy, T. She exploded, calling me names and saying I stole her life. My husband came home from work, and when I explained to him, he was beyond furious. I then got a call from my parents saying I was an asshole for telling my sister she's not allowed to see her baby. I never said that, and I welcomed her to bond with V, but they refused to listen and said I was being insensitive and harsh and flaunting my family. I now feel bad because my sister and I were very close growing up, and I feel quite close to her situation since I know the struggles of infertility. My husband said there was no way he was letting my sister have full time alone with V, and I agree, but I want to know if I'm the asshole for being too harsh and telling her about T.
Story time about how I caught my husband cheating on me with our very young nanny. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. I'm 45 years old and my husband is 10 years younger than me. When we first got married, my friends kept telling me not to marry someone so much younger. They told me that he would eventually cheat and leave me for someone younger. I refused to believe this hope because my husband and I really loved each other. Or at least I thought. We met at a party a few years ago and he made the first move right away. He asked me out on a date and a few weeks later we became boyfriend and girlfriend. A few years after that we got married and after years of trying we finally got pregnant and had twins. They are both 2 years old now. My husband's job requires him to travel a lot. I own a really big salon and business is good. So we have a pretty good life and are able to afford a lot of things for our kids. Since my husband travels, my schedule has to be really flexible. I take care of the kids in the morning and then I go off to work, leaving them with the nanny. Our first nanny was a lot older and she had lots of experience. But she unexpectedly quit on us, so we had to find another one. We decided to look for one of those nanny agencies. We ended up interviewing about 5 nannies, but my husband was set on one of them and she was the youngest out of all of them, 18. Oh yeah, and the most attractive too. My husband told me that maybe we should try someone younger so that the kids can have fun, and I said yes. The nanny would cover for me for about 4 hours a day when I was at work. Her and I started to get along really, really well. She would tell me about her boy troubles and I would give her advice. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I caught my husband cheating on me with our very young nanny. This is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. The nanny and I started to become really good friends. I even started telling her about the problems I was having with my husband. Little did I know that she was the problem. Like I said in part 1, my husband travels a lot. This is what we would usually fight about. You see, it was actually really easy for him to travel less. All he had to do was pick a different region for his job. Instead of a 6-hour flight, it could have been a 2-hour trip. His excuse was that he would get paid less. When I was telling the nanny about our issues, she told me that I should just let it go and let my husband have his freedom. But the way she said it really bothered me. I ended the conversation and told her that she could go home. When my husband came home, I mentioned to him what the nanny said. I told him that I didn't like the way she told me that I needed to give him his freedom. He started to laugh and said she's just a young girl. She's probably just saying what she thinks you need to hear. I decided to listen to my husband and I let it go. A week later, the nanny comes over to take care of the kids. By the way, as soon as she would come to my house, I would serve her a plate of food or make her anything she wanted before I left to work. She sat down to eat. I could see her messages on her phone, and the name on the messages was the same as my husband's. I asked her why she was messaging my husband and she quickly put her phone in her purse. She didn't even know what to say. Part 3 of how I caught my husband cheating on me with our very young nanny. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sent me on Instagram. When I asked her why she was messaging my husband on her phone, she did not know what to say. I asked her if she was okay. Then she replies with, I just needed some advice for my car. She was so nervous. I asked her to pull out her phone and give it to me. That's when she said no and started putting up a fight. She told me I had no right to check her phone, but I didn't believe her. I ripped her purse from her hands and grabbed the phone. Before I even have a chance to look at the messages, she starts calling me fat and old, and that my husband is planning to leave me for her. Honestly, what she was saying didn't faze me because my goal was to look at the messages, and she was pretty much right. In the messages, my husband promised her to leave me for her, and that he was sick of me and the kids. I begin to scroll up and see all of the pictures that they send each other. You can imagine what they were. By the way, the nanny was only a day from turning 18. Yep. Out of nowhere, she starts breaking plates and glasses and verbally abusing me. She even said that if I didn't leave him alone, that something bad would happen to me. I grabbed her by the arm and threw her out of the house, but I kept her phone, so I called my husband from the phone. When he hears my voice, he hangs up the phone. When he finally got home, we got into a 6-hour fight. I made him leave the house, but apparently the nanny went crazy. She started stalking him and he had to get a restraining order against her. Serves him right. Her parents are threatening to press charges. I don't want my kids to grow up without a father, but I don't want to get back with him. What should I do?
Story time about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, hey, I think I saw your husband on the news. So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols. These were 2 big ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club. and somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection, and it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you.
Story time about how my high school principal tried to date me after I graduated. TW, if you think this is gross, don't watch. And disclaimers, is not my story time. It's been 10 years since this happened, but when I was in high school, I was really popular. I was in the cheerleading squad, the badminton team, the volleyball team, and drama club. All the teachers knew me and I got along with almost all the students. I never had any problems with girls or guys. My high school principal was a huge history buff, and so was I. One day I went to his office and asked him if I could start a history club. He was really impressed by this and he said yes. I started asking students if they wanted to join, and mostly it was only boys. And these were the boys that I knew had a crush on me, but I made a promise to my parents that I would focus solely on school and not boys. So that meant no boyfriends for me, and I was totally fine with that. I wasn't boy crazy or anything. I really just wanted to get into a good college and make my parents proud. After I formed the club, the principal asked me if he could sit in on some of the sessions. I said, of course. Our history club would get together every Wednesday, and he would always show up without fail. I mean, obviously, I thought that he was interested in history, and he just wanted to share this experience with us, but clearly I was wrong. After a few weeks, things were getting a little strange. When it was my turn to read, I would always notice him staring at me. And he also brought up the fact that there were only boys in the club. I explained to him that they probably just had a crush on me and that at least it was a way to get them into the club. He told me I needed to find girls because I was too much of a distraction for the boys. But the way that he said it just sounded like he was really jealous. I did my best to get girls in the club, but literally nobody wanted to join. After a few days, I realized that maybe the best thing for me was just to cancel the club. I was already in so many other clubs, and I didn't want to sacrifice my grades. I basically told the guys that we weren't going to have the club anymore, and they all said that was totally fine. But when I told the principal, he flipped out. He started yelling at me and told me that if I didn't keep the club going, that I would never make it in life. He said I wasn't being responsible and that I was letting down the club. So then I was basically forced into continuing the club. But then things got even stranger. He started showing up to every single get-together. And every time that it was over, he would ask me if he could walk me to my car. I mean, at first I thought he was just doing it so that I could be careful, I guess. But we were still on school property and I'm pretty sure nothing was gonna happen to me. That's when he started asking me if I had a boyfriend or if I liked any boys. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my high school principal tried to date me after I graduated. Trigger warning, if you find this subject gross, please don't watch. And disclaimer, this is not my story time. That's when my principal started asking me if I was dating any boys or if I had any crushes on boys. I obviously felt very uncomfortable when he asked me this, so I simply answered no. Then he told me that I could be honest with him. That's when I told him that I made my parents a promise because I was so close to graduating high school and avoid any distractions like boys. That's when he said that I was an amazing woman and that he wished more of the female students were like me. I quickly got in my car and went home. By the way, I was 2 months away from graduating from high school. Now this is when things start to get really weird. I started seeing him around everywhere in school. Our school was pretty big, but I kept bumping into him everywhere. Every time I would see him, he would be like, "Ho ho, are you stalking me?" I would laugh it off and continue walking. One day after history club, he asked me to come to his office with him. He said that he had a surprise for me. He took me to his office and gave me a book on history. I thanked him and tried to leave as quickly as possible, but then he said, "Don't you like it?" So I stood there having to pretend that I was happy that he gave me this book, when in actuality, it made me really uncomfortable. That's when he said that he had seen me in the library reading a book on World War II, and that he just wanted to surprise me with the same book. So this was already letting me know 2 things. Number 1, he's watching me around school and at the library. And number 2, I'm not noticing when he's watching me. I was so creeped out, but I managed to keep my cool. I said thank you again and basically ran away. For the rest of that week, I tried to avoid him as much as I could. I didn't go anywhere near his office, and I avoided the library, which was one of my favorite places in the school. At this point, graduation was only a week away. I was totally wrapped up in my studies that I actually forgot about the principal. Until one day I get a friend request from him on Facebook. At first I thought it was weird, but then I accepted because I figured, well, I'm graduating, so I'm not really going to be seeing him anymore. 5 minutes after I accepted his friend request, I get this really long message from him praising me, saying all these great things about me. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply said thanks. Finally, the day of graduation came and I was forced to see him face to face. That's when he told me that he actually had another gift for me. That's when he hands me an envelope with a blank check. He had the biggest smile on his face. I told him I couldn't accept it and he got mad. Part 3 of how my high school principal tried to date me after I graduated. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. After he hands me the blank check, I look at it and tell him that I simply cannot accept it. That's when he gets really angry, snatches the check from me, and tells me that he'll see me later. After the graduation ceremony, I was so happy and I was with my family. That's when he walks up behind me and asks me to keep the check. My family is watching this whole thing go down, by the way. I look at him and say thank you, but no. He then introduces himself to my family. But of course, he doesn't bring up the whole check thing. We all say goodbye and my family and I go have dinner. That very night, he sends me a message on Facebook again, saying that he shouldn't have given me the check, and he felt like he had crossed the line. I actually felt really bad, so I replied asking him to not feel bad. A week later, I get a text message from him. He said that he took the liberty of looking up my phone number and that he actually really wanted to speak to me. He asked if we could meet up for a coffee, and I said yes, unfortunately. We meet up at the coffee shop, and as soon as we sit down, he starts to confess his feelings for me. He said that I was basically his dream girl and that all he wanted was a wife like me. And he also asked me if I would ever consider dating him. I was actually too stunned to speak. As soon as he realized I wasn't saying yes, he asked me not to say anything, got up and left. I ran home and told my parents everything. My parents were really angry. My dad went straight to the cops. The cops told my dad that they had complaints from other students. He apparently did the same thing to them and asked them out once they graduated. And guess what? One of them said yes. The cops even investigated him after.
Storytime about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So a little background information. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 6 months. And he had been best friends with this girl, we're gonna call her Addie, for about 3 years. Now, I had known Addie way before that, probably since we were in kindergarten. But her and I weren't like BFFs, we were more of acquaintances. But obviously, we became friends because she was always around my boyfriend. A month after him and I started dating, I decided that we had to set boundaries for their friendship. Because they had first period together, right? Well, every morning at 9:45, I would go on Snapchat and I would see a picture of them. And it would be her kissing him on the cheek. Not only would it be on her story, but it would also be on his. And I had her on Snapchat before that. She had never done that, ever. So he said that he had talked to Addie about it, right? And things were good for the next 2 months. Then they were forced to work together on a project. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So like I said, they had been forced to work together on a school project. At least that's what he told me. So I brushed it off because I was not about to seem like the jealous girlfriend. Well, the next day, him and I were supposed to go out to the movies. So I texted him right before we were about to leave, and I said, "Hey, are you on your way to get me?" He goes, "OMG, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. I have to work with Addie on this project. She's about to come over my house." So at this point, I'm like really pissed off. So I text him and I say, "I thought you guys had a whole week to work on this project. Why does it have to be tonight?" Addie knew that him and I were supposed to go to the movies that night also. He said, "We just want to get it done really quickly so that way I can spend the rest of the week with you." And she's snapping me the whole time that she's at his house off of his phone. So at around 1:30 a.m., I get a Snapchat from her on his account, and she's laying on his chest. Like for part 3. Part 3 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with this girl best friend. So like I said, she snaps me at 1:30 in the morning, a picture of her laying on his chest, and it's captioned, "Hey girlie, I hope you don't mind, but I have to spend the night at his house. He lost track of time working on our project, and it's way too late for him to take me home." So at this point, I'm furious, and I don't snap her back. So the next morning, I call my boyfriend, and I asked him, "Hey, is Addie still there?" So he says yeah, and then I ask him to put me on speakerphone. So when he does, I say hi to Addie. She goes, "OMG, hey girl, how are you?" And that's when I pretty much go off on this bitch. I tell him that while he was asleep, she was sending me pictures of her laying on top of him off of his Snapchat, and that she was sending those type of pictures to multiple people on his Snapchat because my best friend had texted me that morning saying that she thought that we broke up because Addie was sending her pictures of her laying on top of him. So I tell him, pick, me or her. And she starts crying. After a minute of silence, he hangs up the phone and then blocks me. Good luck to the next...